The Role of Agency, comparing Kyd's Belle Imperia and Webster's The Duchess, a creative project by Hunter Rainey. Despite being written in different literary periods, the female characters in both Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy and Webster's The Duchess of Malfi share striking similarities and differences regarding their displays of agency. This comparison highlights Kyd's influence on later playwrights and how those playwrights actively reinvented the ideas passed on to them by Seneca. To begin, a brief overview of the two female characters in question. Kyd's Belle Imperia and Webster's The Duchess are respectively struggling in the worlds of love and agency. Both female characters experience loss, love, and ultimately death. Belle Imperia and the Duchess lose loved ones, show certain agency levels in their pursuits, and are plagued by evil family members. In the end, they both end up dying because of the same agency that sets them apart from the typical depictions of women for their time. By comparing these women's experiences, Kyd's influence on the playwrights that came after him becomes more apparent. It highlights a progression in the revenge tragedy genre brought to Kyd by Seneca and to other playwrights by Kyd. It is important to mention that both Belle Imperia and the Duchess do not concern themselves with what others want for them. They both possess a form of agency. This is relevant in terms of their choices of romantic partners. Belle Imperia and the Duchess lose their first husband, Don Andrea, in the case of Belle Imperia, and Alfonso in the case of the Duchess. After this, they both choose to seek out love again with unsuitable matches in the eyes of their family. After Don Andrea's death, Belle Imperia begins a romantic relationship with Horatio, who just so happens to be the one who captures Don Andrea's killer. Horatio is below her in stature and an unsuitable match. In her article By Heaven and Hell, Reevaluating Representation of Women and the Angel-Whore Dichotomy in Renaissance Revenge Tragedy, Roxane Grimmett explains that Belle Imperia's reoccurring choice of lovers is treasonous. She does so by citing a law by Edward III. She says, quote, "In terms of class, her involvement with both Andrea and Horatio would inspire contemporary censure, as although both are gentlemen of some rank, they remain far below the regality which exudes from even her name. Most dramatically, since her uncle is childless, Belle Imperia is Spain's sole female heir, and these romantic liaisons are actually high treason. If a man do violate the king's companion or eldest daughter unmarried, his act will be judged treasonous." End quote. Grimmett, no page number. The Duchess is previously married to Alfonso and has a child with him. He dies, and the Duchess is left yearning for love and a family. After hearing from her brothers about their wishes concerning her marrying again, the Duchess defies them. She marries Antonio and proceeds to have children with him. This is kept a secret. They are ultimately caught, and tragedy strikes. Antonio is an unsuitable match because of his social status. He is merely a steward to the Duchess and presumably has no royal reputation or claim. Both of the Duchess's brothers seem to have a problem with this, yet it is Ferdinand that is taking the lead. In her article, Delinquent Pedigrees, Revision, Lineage, and Spatial Rhetoric in The Duchess of Malfi, Michelle Dow emphasizes because of the Duchess' illegitimate child, quote, "Ferdinand's unruly fantasies get directly to the heart of the matter. They attest to his maniacal concern about the tainted bloodline, his fears of losing control over his sister's sexuality, and his desire to maintain his insular elite privilege." End quote. Down 516. She goes on to explain that the time jump between Act 2 and Act 3 provides more challenges for Ferdinand as, quote, "Temporarily and temporally beyond her brother's control, the Duchess produces not one but several new pedigrees, lines of descent that stand as direct challenges to her brother's authority and flout to implicit logic of patrilineality by being excessive, divergent, and outside of the representational bounds of the stage." End quote. 518. Despite being in very similar situations, these women have drastically different motives which question the agency they display while choosing their lovers in the first place. Although she chooses Horatio as a romantic and sexual partner, Belle Imperia does give off the impression that her intentions are solely about revenge. Quote, "From whence Horatio proves my second love, Had he not loved Andrea as he did, he could not sit in Bellempiria's thoughts. But how can love find harbor in my breast, till I revenge the death of my beloved? Yes, second love shall further my revenge. I'll love Horatio, my Andrea's friend, the more to spite the prince that wrought his end. End quote. Kyd, Act 1, Scene 4, lines 61 to 68. Bellempiria is avenging her beloved by using another man. This questions her authenticity and her agency. Are her acts truly a sign of the free will Kyd allows her, or are they orchestrated by the character Revenge and her master plot? In the case of the Duchess, her intentions seem pure. It does not seem that Webster attributes the Duchess's remarriage to an ulterior motive or scheme. Her choice of an unsuitable lover is an act of complete agency. She makes her own choice based on her well-being and desires. As mentioned, these women are also made victim to the overseeing eyes of evil family members that give off the impression they know what is best. Bellempiria often deals with her brother Lorenzo's actions, whereas the Cardinal and Ferdinand are always attempting to control the Duchess's life. In the individual cases, these male family members actively try to take agency away from their sisters, and technically, in both cases, they succeed. With Bellempiria, her brother Lorenzo is friends with Balthazar, Don Andrea's murderer and the man who is currently seeking her affections. Lorenzo is actively pushing for a relationship between the two, even going as far as killing Horatio as he stands in the way. Quote, Horatio, what, will you murder me? Lorenzo, I, thus and thus, these are the fruits of love. They stab him. Bellempiria, oh, save his life and let me die for him. Oh, save him, brother, save him, Balthazar. End quote. Act 2, Scene 4, line 54 to 57. The scene continues with Balthazar and Lorenzo taking Bellempiria hostage. Both of these actions are attempting to take away Bellempiria's agency. Kyd's portrayal of Bellempiria and her agency is impacted by the lurking eyes and actions of a male family member in power. Bellempiria's agency does take a hit in this particular moment, but she does regain power during the latter half of the play. On the other hand, the Duchess more or less keeps a strong sense of agency throughout the whole play, despite the watchful eyes of her brothers. She goes against their wishes in secret and marries Antonio. Quote, lay in my way onto this marriage, I'd make thee my love footsteps, and even now, even in this hate, as men in some great battles, by apprehending danger have achieved. Almost impossible actions, I have heard soldiers say so. So I, through frights and threatenings, will essay this dangerous venture. Let old wives report, I winked and chose a husband. End quote. Webster, Act 1, Scene 1, lines 343 to 50. She is actively going on with what she wants. She is keeping a form of agency. These men do not have complete power over her. They force her to have a secret relationship and family, which some may argue affects her agency. However, because she still goes against their wishes, instead of not seeking out this relationship, her agency is intact. Antonio is eventually murdered because of her brother's wishes. However, because it takes place after her death, it does not count as a move against her agency either. This is a direct contrast to Bellempiria, who dies after Horatio. Both of these female characters die near the end of their respective narratives. Bellempiria kills herself, and the Duchess is murdered at the command of her brother Ferdinand. For both these women, the act of dying questions their agency. Bellempiria takes her own life after she achieves revenge for John Andrea. Although she actively chooses to take her own life, this act questions whether Bellempiria is acting under her own free will. Is she killing herself because she knows her purpose is complete, or is her death the result of the character Revenge's hands? Some critics, like Timothy Rosendale in his article Agency and Ethics in the Spanish Tragedy, argue that Bellempiria's act of suicide is an act of agency. Quote, one is Bellempiria's suicidal off-script improvisation, contrary to the ending that Hieronymo had planned to spare her. In doing so, she in effect refuses authorial grace and self-destructs in a supreme act of self-determination, thus leaving the godlike author's will effective to kill but ineffective to save. End quote. Rosendale, no page number. Geronimo is choosing to spare her, and she chooses to die instead. Readers assume that her death is not part of Revenge's plan because Geronimo decides to spare her. Because of this, Bella Imperia regains the agency that is lost through the death of Horatio and her kidnapping. The Duchess is killed under the command of her brother Ferdinand. She accepts her death. She is willing to die for her love and agency. In his article, Webster's Worthiest Monument, The Problem of Prosperity in the Duchess of Malfi, Brian Chalk argues by doing so, quote, the Duchess escapes their manipulations and refuses to signify anything beyond the brave acceptance of death, end quote, Chalk, page 396. She chooses to die not only to escape her brothers, but because it is for something she believes in. Her acts also lead to their heir being a son of Antonio's, which was Ferdinand's fear. Quote, to establish this young hopeful gentleman in mother's right, these wretched eminent things leave no more fame behind them than should one fall in a frost and leave his prince in snow. End quote. Act 5, Scene 5, lines 130 to 133. The Duchess's agency lives on past her death, which is further proof that she was in charge of not only her destiny, but the destiny of Malfi. Both Kyd and Webster used the concept of agency with their female characters. It is more or less common knowledge that women in their time were passive, and these authors directly go against that. Bella Imperia makes her own decisions, although sometimes outside forces attempt to get in the way. The Duchess is true to herself and her desires, acting with a strong sense of agency, only wavering once her lover and family must be kept a secret. An analysis comparing these female characters, their portrayal, and their experiences show readers that there is a clear progression from the beginning of the revenge tragedy genre to when Webster is writing. Female characters are beginning to have more and more agency, solely dependent on their needs and desires. Thank you for listening.